Alrighty. Okay. So good morning again. I am going to put into our chat here two documents. Um, one of them is a offer practice sheet, which we'll go over. And then the other is a version of the compensation agreement, which is referenced in the offer document. So hold on a second. Here's one. And here's two. Okay. So how this works, I have already put together a version of the offer based on the offer directions that I just provided. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen okay? I'm going to assume yes. So we are going to be, oh, I got a chat. Perfect. Okay. We are going to be writing an offer on this property here at 3566 South Pine in Milwaukee. So I'm just going to bring this up here. It's actually under contract already, but that's okay. So it's a three bed, 1.5 bath home. Just shy, looks like 1,300 square feet. It's in the city of Milwaukee. Nothing like too out of the ordinary in terms of, things that are going on with this house. In terms of the private remarks, the seller is looking for 48 hours binding acceptance. Put all offers in one PDF. So again, whenever you're looking at a potential listing, it's always helpful to look at what's going on in the private remarks because it might tee you up for some of the seller preferences. So if I just go back quickly to the offer document here, our buyer is going to be Tucker Craft. Do you know who Tucker Craft is? I usually like to do sports figures that are relevant. Let me see. Did you guess it right? Oh, you don't. Okay. He's a tight end for the Packers. Okay. So we just met Tucker last weekend at an open house. And when we met him, he signed a pre-agency agreement with us just so he could start seeing some houses right away. Well, over the last week or so, we've shown him this house on Pine, and he's ready to actually sign the buyer agency agreement with us. So remember, in order to be able to write an offer on behalf of a buyer, we either have to have a signed buyer agency or a signed disclosure to customer. So Tucker's ready to sign the buyer agency agreement. Terms are going to be 2.4%, and his budget is up to $450,000. Okay. His closing time frame is flexible. He knows because he's a first-time home buyer, he's going to want to have a home inspection and a radon inspection. And then in terms of his financial situation, he's ready to put down 15%. He's approved with a local lender. And then for our purposes today, we're just going to use a 7% mortgage rate. So let's make some assumptions about this offer. We've called the listing agent and we've indicated that our buyers are really interested in writing an offer. Is there anything that we should be aware of as it pertains to seller preferences? And the listing agent said yes. She said the seller is offering cooperative compensation of 2.4% to the buyer's agent, and that she would actually rather prefer versus having somebody put in the offer the compensation as a contingency. She's asking that the buyer's agent sign a compensation agreement ahead of time and send it back to her. So I have a copy of that and we'll see in a moment. While private remarks said 48 hours for binding acceptance, she's okay with 24 hours. And just to give us the heads up too, 2 offers have been submitted already. So we're going to be in competition. For our offer then, we're just going to kind of keep things pretty basic as it pertains to instructions. Tucker's going to offer $401,000. in terms of inclusions and exclusions, what is listed on MLS is what he's comfortable putting into the offer. We're going to have a close date of December 30th. Earnest money, 3% of the purchase price. Typically, this can be anywhere between 1 to 3%. That's what we see in this market. And then in terms of contingencies, there's going to be a few. We know that Tucker wanted to have a home inspection and a radon inspection, but he's also willing to cover the first $3,000 in inspection repairs. So that's important to note because we'll be using an additional addenda to include with our offer specifically that focuses on that. Financing terms stated above, so he's going to put down 15%. He'd like an appraisal contingency. And then he knows because he's in competition, he'd like to add an escalation clause. So while his initial offer is $401,000, he's willing to go up to $415,000 if somebody comes in higher than him. And last but not least, like we had indicated, the seller or the listing agent doesn't want us to add our compensation as a contingency within the offer. So she would like us to send back a compensation agreement prior to submitting the offer. So I've got a copy here of that compensation agreement, and this is what this would look like. So the compensation agreement is filled out by the listing agent. And so she would have put all this information up here, but you're going to be writing as the cooperating firm. So the firms that is representing the buyer. So you're going to be putting your name, firm name, your name, email address, and telephone number. And then this is a section that would have been filled out by the listing agent. So it shows you here that the buyer's firm will be compensated from the list by the listing firm at a rate of 2.4% of the purchase price. So this is again confirming what your commission is going to be. And that compensation is earned when the cooperating firm drafts the offer that successfully closes or is procuring cause. So just something to keep in mind, like if a listing agent is asking that you fill this out and send it out ahead of time versus putting it in the offer, this is the type of document that listing agent is referencing. Just going to quickly go. Oh, you can't see the compensation agreement. Of course you can. Let me see here. How about now? That should be good. So again, just to quickly recap, the listing agent fills out this top information. You as the buyer's agent, once you get your buyer agency agreement signed, will fill out the cooperating firm information. The listing agent will fill out the compensation that's being offered, which is 2.4% of the purchase price. And the listing agent will also indicate how a commission is received, and that's based on the cooperating firm drafting the offer that successfully closes or has procuring cause. So make sure you sign this and send it back to the listing agent prior to submitting your offer. And now I'm just going to go right into zip forms. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to check the chat. Perfect. I've already filled out an offer document, so we can just go through that. It's kind of like an answer key. Okay. So here we go. We're drafting our offer today on December 2nd, and we are drafting it as an agent of the buyer. Now, remember at the beginning, we had mentioned that Tucker, our buyer, had signed a pre-agency agreement with us in order to just get some showings scheduled. But now Tucker wants to write an offer and therefore is comfortable signing the buyer agency agreement. Once he signs that, he becomes a client, and therefore we are his agent. We are solely representing him. So I've crossed off then agent of seller, a listing firm, or agent of the buyer and seller. I've put his name here, Tucker Craft. I've added the address here, 3566 South Pine, and that address is in the city of Milwaukee. Just to show you again, if you don't know if it's like a city or a village or a town, everything is here in MLS. Oops. Listed right here, municipality, city. MLS will also tell you what county the property is in. So Milwaukee County right up there on top. So we're going to go back to our zip forms. And again, so we're at 3566 South Pine. It's in the city of Milwaukee, county of Milwaukee. Our purchase price that we're initially offering is $401,000. So we just have to type in 401 here. And then the zip forms will automatically populate line 9. Included in the purchase price, so Tucker was okay with everything that was listed in MLS. So stove, oven, fridge, disposal, dishwasher, mirror in the entry, all light fixtures, and ceiling fans. And I got that information. If I go back over to MLS, right here under the inclusions list. Now, if there's anything that maybe the buyer doesn't want that's still being offered, you would exclude that and you would take that item and put it as an exclusion. But if you're not quite sure what's actually being offered or just want to double check, it's okay to call the listing agent just to confirm. Not included in the purchase price is the seller's personal property, the fridge in the basement, and then the washer and dryer. I also got that information from the exclusion section here. Make sure you're pretty clear with and get specific with things here because this can also, you want to make sure that your buyers are okay with what you're putting as a list of inclusions and exclusions because sometimes there can be surprises when a buyer thought they were getting something, but it wasn't really written into the offer. So just make sure you are very specific with what you put into the document and that you cover off on that list as well with your buyers. Lines 24 through 36 just cover off on additional definitions of what fall within a fixture as a fixture. So make sure you familiarize yourself with that. Binding acceptance. So we're asking that both parties go get into an accepted offer or the document is signed by the seller and returned back to the buyer, making it binding by December 3rd, so tomorrow. Now, if you wanted to do noon on tomorrow or, 6 p.m., you can. You just have to add in that specific time. Otherwise, if you don't denote a time of day, the deadline here runs up until 11:59 p.m. of the 3rd. So any deadline runs until the end of the day, until 11:59. Closing, we are asking to have closing on December 30th, and it's going to be at a place selected by the buyer. So I've crossed off at the place selected by the seller. Moving into the second page, make sure, for some reason, Zip Forms doesn't always carry over the address at the top of the page 2. So if that's the case, you can just click on the line and add in the remaining fields if those are missing. This top section here is earnest money. So we are going to be offering, as I mentioned in our list of instructions for the offer, we're going to be offering 3% of the purchase price. So 3% of $401,000 is $12,030. And we're going to deliver that within 3 days. So if you don't put a number of days in here, it will automatically just default to 5 days. But typically I like to put 2 to 3 days just to try to speed things up and to show that my buyers are ready to go. All of the earnest money is going to be delivered to and held by the listing firm. So I've crossed off drafting firm and other identified. If, say, for example, a title company was holding earnest money, then you would cross off listing firm, you'd cross off drafting firm, you'd keep other identified as, and you would state here in line 61 what the title company's name and address is, and you would get that information from the listing agent. So if you aren't quite sure as to who's holding earnest money, it's okay to give the listing agent a call just to double check. Then this section here covers off on how earnest money might be dispersed if we don't get to closing and what types of legal rights or actions either party can take. The real estate condition report. So there was a condition report provided by the seller, and the buyer has to acknowledge that they did in fact receive a copy of the condition report. Now, they might not agree with what's in the condition report's contents, but they have to acknowledge that they did in fact receive a condition report, and we have to indicate the date that that condition report was filled out by the seller. So you can find that date by going over to MLS, into the Documents tab, and here's our seller condition report. So here it is, based on signed or filled out on November 18th. So that's the date that I put in our offer, November 18th. Moving along to page 3. Again, always just make sure that the address here has carried over to the top of the page. But there's nothing here on page 3 that we have to modify or change. It's just a list of definitions and things that might appear on a condition report. So then we move right into page 4 and we start getting into some of our contingencies. The first contingency that could be included in the offer is the home inspection. So we know that our buyer would like to, in fact, have a home inspection. So I've checked the box on line 193, indicating that the contingency is included within our offer. Now, a home inspection is just a visual inspection of the home. It has to be completed and done by a licensed and registered home inspector with the state. It can't be like the buyer themselves or, maybe the buyer's uncle. But because we're including it within the offer, we put the X in box 193. Now, as part of our home inspection, if the home inspector has indicated that they recommend having a follow-up inspection, maybe on a specific area of the home, like a roof or a basement or a chimney, the buyer does have the right to have follow-up recommendations or follow-up inspections based on any recommendations put in that report. The buyer can choose to do it, the buyer can choose not to do it. But this contingency already allows us to have access to the home. Now, on line 206, we have to indicate when we're going to have our home inspection contingency satisfied. And if you don't put any number of days here, the blank would default automatically to 15 days. I've put in 8 days on this line, and the reason being we are closing in less than 30 days. And if I were to have like 10 days, 12 days, 15 days, to me, that's a little bit too long to wait because we have such a short time frame for the overall transaction. So I've put 8 days here, and 8 days doesn't mean I'm going to have the home inspection completed within 8 days. That means I have to have the home inspection completed, any follow-up inspections that are going to be conducted, and I have to have any type of repairs or credits or price adjustments negotiated with the seller within that time frame. Now, if, for example, in our inspection, it says that we need a new roof, and we got an estimate from a roofer, and it's going to be $15,000. If you're trying to negotiate the seller to repair the roof prior to closing, or maybe give you some type of price adjustment or credit, and if the seller agrees to any one of those remedies, you must have an amendment signed by both parties indicating such. Now, again, this all has to happen within this time frame. It's just not the number of days that you have to have the home inspection done. If 8 days passes and you don't have any amendment signed or resolution, or if you haven't waived the home inspection contingency, your buyer has just purchased the house as is. So make sure you're always on top of your dates and deadlines. Now, in terms of the right to cure, in our market, since it's still a seller's market, it's very common to give the seller the right to cure the home inspection. So I have crossed off shall not, and I have kept seller shall have the right to cure the defects. Now, a right to cure could mean a variety of things. This is where you are working closely with the other agent to negotiate something that is going to be both beneficial to you and your buyers, but also to the seller as well. So when you're negotiating, and if you can come to an agreement, again, that agreement is put into an amendment and specified as to what happens next. If you can't come to an agreement, and your buyers are not able to either take on the repairs themselves or are just ready to walk, you can deliver a notice to the buyer or to the seller indicating the defects that have been found in the home inspection. So if the seller has the right to cure, I'm just going to read this word for word. The seller can satisfy the contingency by delivering written notice to the buyer within blank days after the buyer sends a notice of defects that the seller is going to cure. So here's how that would work. Say you're negotiating and you can't come to an agreement on anything, and we're getting to the deadline of our home inspection contingency. If your buyers are prepared to take on the work themselves, that's one thing. If your buyers are ready to walk because they can't take on repairs, you would draft a notice of defect listing all of the defects that were found in the home inspection report. You then deliver that to the listing agent. This indicates here the seller has 2 days after the buyer has submitted that notice of defects. The seller has 2 days to determine whether or not they're actually going to cure everything that is on that list. So now it's not maybe just 1 or 2 things that you were negotiating. Now they've got to cure everything that's on the list. They've got to cure it in a good and workmanlike manner, and they have to send a report to the buyer detailing all of the work that was done no later than 3 days prior to closing. Now, the offer, though, is null and void if the buyer has delivered the notice of defects to this listing agent. They've also delivered the inspection report along with that notice of defects. And the seller has the right to cure, but the seller determines, you know what, we're not going to cure, and we're going to send you a notice indicating such. Then the deal is dead. So make sure you familiarize yourself with all of this language here, because all of the answers and the scenarios are right here for you in black and white. We have several contract training sessions from this past summer that specifically cover the home inspection contingency. You can find all of those on our YouTube channel. So I'd highly encourage you to head on over to that and get some extra help and assistance as it pertains to the home inspection contingency. But for our time today, I've got to keep on moving. Next up is the radon test. So the offer is then also contingent upon the buyer getting a written report of what's happening from a radon perspective. And typically the radon test follows the same time frame as the home inspection contingency. A lot of home inspectors can also do radon tests at the same time. So our offer, again, is dependent on having that tested, and it's going to be at the buyer's expense. If you don't strike either one of these, it automatically defaults to the buyer's expense. So similar to a buyer paying for the home inspection, it's common for the buyer then to also pay an extra fee to have the home tested for radon as well. And we're following the same time frame as the home inspection. So the contingency is going to be deemed satisfied unless the buyer within 8 days after acceptance delivers to the seller a written copy of the report and a notice objecting to the radon level. So if the radon levels come in high, you would issue a notice indicating such along with a copy of the report. Now, the seller shall or shall not have the right to cure. And in our current marketplace, buyers are giving the seller the right to cure the radon test. And if the seller does have the right to cure, they can satisfy the contingency by delivering a notice back to the buyer indicating that they're going to cure within 10 days and they're going to install a radon mitigation system. So again, a lot of the options that are available to satisfy the contingency here are right directly in the offer. So please familiarize yourself with this language. But a lot of it looks very similar to the language found in the home inspection contingency. But I'm going to move on. Now we're at financing. So we know that our buyer is going to get a loan. So I've checked the box here indicating that the offer is contingent upon the buyer getting a written loan commitment. In line 249, this is where you put the type of loan that your buyer is looking to get. Could be a 30-year conventional, could be 15-year, it might be an FHA loan, it might be a VA loan. Whatever the loan type is, you just type in that detail here. And we're going to try to deliver that loan commitment within blank days after acceptance. So typically financing can be done anywhere between 14 days to 28 days. If you're not quite sure how fast your buyer's lender can work, it's best practice to call the lender while you are drafting the offer to firm up some of these details, because the last thing that you want to do is have a fast or an advantageous deadline in your offer, and your lender won't be able to meet that deadline. So this is a section too, as a newer agent, I would always recommend you reach out to the lender just to confirm some of these specifics. But for our offer, since we're closing in about 28 days or so, I've indicated we're going to deliver our loan commitment within 21 days. The financing for this loan shall be in an amount of not less than blank. So this amount here on line 251 is our offer price of $401,000 minus the 15% down payment. So this is actually the amount of money that our buyer is going to be getting a loan or his mortgage for, $340,850. So if you don't have a mortgage calculator already on your phone, I highly recommend that you download an app. You can use the Focus Title app. They have a great mortgage calculator. I use Carl's mortgage calculator, Carl with a K, but that will help make filling out this section a lot easier. So again, the amount here on line 251 is our offer price minus our down payment amount. So this is the principal of our loan. It's going to be amortized over 30 years, and it's going to be for a term of not less than 30 years. If you had a 15-year loan, these things here would be 15 and 15. But our initial monthly payments of principal and interest shall not exceed blank. So this amount here is taking a 15% down payment using an interest rate of 7% and amortizing that over 30 years. So this is what Tucker's, our buyer's, initial monthly payment is going to be just for his loan, just his principal and interest. It doesn't include anything else like PMI or taxes. So again, if you're using a mortgage calculator and if you're putting in all of the specific variables like 30 years, 15% down, offer price of $401,000, 7% interest rate, it'll help you calculate what the monthly payment's going to be. Now, make sure that your buyer understands too that this is just the loan amount. So the buyer acknowledges that the lenders also might require a 1/12 of the taxes. It might have hazard insurance. It might have PMI. So their monthly payment might actually be larger than this, but this is just specifically what they are getting the loan for. Now, in terms of our type of financing, we're getting a fixed rate mortgage, meaning it's going to be the same interest rate for the duration of the loan. So I've checked the box here and I've indicated that the annual interest rate shall not exceed 7%. So again, as I mentioned before, when you are filling out the financing section, if you're not quite sure about interest rates and where they're currently at, or what the lender might be able to get your buyer to lock in at, pick up the phone and ask the lender, what interest rate shall I be putting into the offer? A lot of times you might pad it a little bit just because interest rates can be so variable. Like I give my buyers a little bit of a cushion and I raise it up a little bit. But if you don't know, it's okay to ask the lender. If your buyer was getting an ARM or an adjustable rate mortgage, you would check this box instead on line 265. I would probably then have the lender help fill out this section, because with an adjustable rate mortgage, your buyers are going to be charged a different interest rate during different years of the loan. So it's helpful just to get a second set of eyes and really some additional help here, understanding what your buyer's ARM terms might be. So I'm going to scroll down here. Once we get through financing, I think this is the first instance where we are not going to be including a contingency. So we are not going to be asking for seller financing. And rather than leaving this box blank, it's best practice to put NA, not applicable. So put not applicable there. We get up to the top of page 6. If we were writing a cash offer that wasn't contingent on financing, this is where we would fill in the number of days we would give ourselves or our buyers to provide a proof of funds. But that's not the case in this offer because our buyer's getting financing. So we're just going to skip this section. We're going to move down to the appraisal contingency. So this appraisal contingency, sometimes people get confused and check this box, meaning like, yes, we're going to have an appraisal. You will have an appraisal done if you're getting a loan, or if your buyer's getting working with the lender. Checking the box though in line 308 and including the appraisal contingency brings more specificity to what can happen if the appraised amount comes in lower than what the buyer was offering. So I'm just going to read this. This offer is contingent upon the buyer or the buyer's lender having the property appraised at the buyer's expense by a Wisconsin licensed or certified appraiser. That appraiser is going to issue an appraisal report. And the appraisal has to be done after the date that we're writing our offer. So the appraisal can't be done before. And that report indicates either appraised value for the property that's equal to, so it maybe the appraiser comes in and says, yep, it's worth $401,000, equal to or greater than the agreed purchase price. Now, what happens if the appraised value comes in lower than what we're offering? This is where there's more specificity around what can happen. The contingency shall be deemed satisfied unless the buyer within blank days after acceptance, I'll get to this number in a second, delivers to a seller a copy of the appraisal report indicating an appraised value less than the agreed upon purchase price, and a written notice objecting to the appraised value. So if the appraised value comes in at $390,000, we are going to be giving a copy of that appraisal report to the listing agent so they have verification that it in fact came in less than what we were offering. Now, if we give the seller the right to cure, the seller then can satisfy the contingency by delivering notice back to the buyer that they would adjust the purchase price down to $390,000. Or maybe if your buyers have some extra cash on hand, then they have the opportunity to maybe split the difference with the seller. So maybe the buyer pays a little bit of the difference, the seller pays a little bit of a difference. But what we're trying to do here within our contingency time frame is have it appraised and then negotiate any differences. Now, I mentioned I was going to come back to this number of days up here. Usually the appraisal contingency it follows the same time frame as the financing contingency, or sometimes it's due a few days beforehand. I always like to put my appraisal contingency due a few days prior to the loan commitment. So I put 17 days here. But I'm only going to be giving the seller 1 day to determine whether or not they're going to officially adjust the purchase price if it comes in low. And I'm only giving them a day because number one, I'm going to be in contact quite frequently with the listing agent about what's happening. So there shouldn't be any surprises as to what type of solution we hope to get between the two parties. But we also just don't have a ton of time because our transaction is closing within 28 days. So I've put 1 day here. I'm going to move past. We aren't going to include a home sale contingency, so I put NA. We aren't going to include a bump clause, so I put NA. And we aren't writing as a secondary offer. We want to be the first and primary offer, so I put NA in this section. We actually have quite a few contract training videos too on some of these topics as well. So if you want to familiarize yourself with what a home sale contingency is, how a bump clause works, we do have some previous trainings that cover those topics. In terms of closing proration, so we have to decide how are things like taxes and assessments and municipal charges going to be prorated between the buyer and the seller. I've checked the box here on line 366 indicating we're going to use the taxes from the preceding year. So in our case, 2023. And that's how things are going to be prorated. The title company will help us determine what those amounts are. They're prorated by day, but we need to be able to check a box in terms of how the title company should be calculating those amounts. And the majority of times you're going to be checking box 366. Now, if it's like vacant land and now there's a house on the property, and the taxes haven't been adjusted to reflect the conversion from land to residential, you might not be checking this box. You might be checking one of these other options. And if you have specific questions, by all means, give one of your compliance brokers a call, or you can even call the helpline just to walk through some various scenarios to figure out what might be best for your buyer. This section here covers off on title. Seller's responsible for getting that deed and for getting title insurance. So familiarize yourself with that language. I'm going to skip down through here because it's a bunch of definitions. But these are some important things, though, to make sure that you are aware of as well as your buyer, like what kind of maintenance the seller is responsible for keeping the home in, what happens if there's property damage between now and closing. So make sure you do, in fact, read through this document so you understand those types of things that are eligible for your buyer to participate in. Now, on the final page here, if we were adding our compensation or our commission to the offer as a contingency, I would have checked this box on line 543. But our listing agent has indicated she would rather have that compensation agreement signed in advance of receiving the offer. So therefore, I put NA to this contingency. Additional provisions. So there is a section within zip forms. If you want to add some additional language, some clauses, some of these might already be included in your zip forms. For example, this section here, if any contingency deadline expires on a Saturday, Sunday, or federal or state holiday, the deadline's extended. The only time that doesn't happen is binding acceptance. Where would I find this language if it's not already pre-printed in my zip forms? I go over here to clauses, click on clauses, click on global, and there's 22 different clauses that have been drafted and approved by our attorneys as approved language. So if I went here, let's see here, business day deadlines. I just have to copy and paste it and put it in the blank lines. I also added in here too some language around how the seller could cure any type of repairs or home inspection items. So I want to make sure that they cure it in a good and workmanlike manner using professional licensed experts. So again, familiarize yourselves with these clauses because some of these are super, super handy and can come in a pinch, can be very handy in a pinch. So then I've just filled out the rest of the offer. I've put in our email addresses for the seller, which is the listing agent, my email address for the buyer. And then I've indicated we're attaching a couple of addenda. So we're attaching addenda A and addenda AC. I'll go over those in a second. And then make sure you put your name and Keller Williams as the draftee. So that's it for the big offer. And I'm sorry I'm going through this so fast, but I just want to get through these other documents. Next up is addenda A. And this is used if you're going to be adding like seller credits to the offer, if there's a home warranty, if there was maybe a well or a septic system or a mound system that need to be tested. This is where you would be able to indicate those types of items that you'd like to include in your offer. But you'll see here, this is a lot of NAs because we aren't really using this document for any of those items. And really the only thing we're adding is all the way here at the bottom. And that is we're including lead-based paint addendum S to our offer. Because the home was built before 1978, we have to indicate, or we have to sign the lead-based paint addendum and indicate whether or not the buyer is going to have the lead paint inspection or waive it. But this is where we indicate the lead paint addendum is included in the offer. And then the information that you fill out here on the left-hand side, this is all of your information, you as the buyer's agent and the buyer's firm. Everything here on the right-hand side is the information that you fill out for the listing agent and the listing agent's firm. You can get all of this information off of MLS. So if I go to the detail, here is all of her information, her name, her number, the listing office license number, and then the listing agent's license number. So really that's it for addendum A. That was an easy one. And then the last document is going to be addendum AC. And addendum AC is broken up into 3 sections. And for our offer today, we're going to be using it for 2 out of the 3 sections. So we put a date that our offer here is going to be written on, our buyer's name and the address. And the first section here is we're having a home inspection. But remember in our offer instructions, Tucker said he would be willing to pay for the first $3,000 worth of repairs. So I've checked the box here because the buyer is indicating that they agreed not to submit any notice of defect or an amendment for repair, replacement, or credit, or a price reduction, unless the cumulative estimated cost to repair the defects identified in the inspections exceeds $3,000. So this means, again, Tucker's willing to cover some of these things. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if there's $3,000 worth of repairs that need to be made, we are not going to come back to you and ask for those things to be fixed, give us a credit on it, or purchase price reduction. But if there are things that exceed $3,000, so this is cumulative, so you can add things together, then, and if the seller has the right to cure the defects, then we are going to cure those in one of those ways, a credit, a repair, etc. So this section here indicates that the estimates to figure out how much things are going to cost shall be obtained by an independent contractor or professional. The seller agrees to give access to the buyer to get those estimates. And the buyer is going to pay any costs associated with getting those estimates. So There are some companies now that are not giving free estimates anymore, and if that's the case, and your buyer is willing to pay for it, this just also indicates that the buyer is responsible for paying for those estimates. Now, the parties may together agree on the cost to repair or replace the defects for purposes of this provision. So again, like the estimates obtained are only used to help us figure out the negotiations. And they have to be put in writing if we are going to, in fact, negotiate something. So what else does this, though, contingency include? And it actually includes some things that are both beneficial for your buyer and for the seller. I checked the box here indicating that the seller can also get estimates. I don't have any issue with the seller also trying to get some estimates as well. And if, say, for example, the seller gets an estimate on a roof and it says it's going to be $10,000 to fix, and our buyer also gets an estimate on the roof, but that estimate says it's going to cost $15,000 to repair. This contingency indicates that they're going to have the opportunity to average the estimates together. So in our example, seller had a $10,000 estimate, buyer had a $15,000 estimate. The average is $12,500. So it kind of specifies and gives directions to both parties as to what happens if we don't get similar estimates. This contingency also allows you to extend your deadline for your home inspection contingency by blank days. So I put 5 days here. Now, it just doesn't automatically extend. So if you recall our original offer, our home inspection contingency was going to be due in 8 days. Well, say we're having a hard time getting follow-up inspectors in, and we're still trying to get estimates, and both parties agree to signing an amendment extending the inspection contingency deadline to allow for us to finish negotiations and gathering information. You can do that, but you have to make sure that you deliver notice of the extension. You can't just let it carry through. You actually have to deliver notice in writing that you are in fact executing that part of the offer. I mentioned earlier that this document is used in 3 ways. So home inspection coverage, an appraisal gap. So if your buyer was able to cover some of any appraisal deficiencies with some cash, we would use that here, or we would check that box here and use this section. But we're not, so we're putting NA. But the last section here is the escalation clause. So we had indicated that Tucker wanted to offer $401,000, but he knew that he was already in competition. So he thought, okay, if somebody comes in higher than $401,000, I don't want to lose this house, but I don't want to pay more than $415,000. So how we use this section. If the seller accepts this offer and gets one or more additional bona fide offers, no later than I've used the same date as our binding acceptance date, that result in net proceeds payable to the seller equal to or greater than net proceeds payable to the seller under this offer. So this means if the seller gets another offer that's over the offer price that we are offering. So if the seller gets an offer for more than $401,000, then the purchase price of our offer, this offer, shall automatically increase to an amount which generates net proceeds of sale to seller blank in excess of the highest net proceeds of sale generated in the other offer. So this means if somebody comes in higher than us, we are willing to go $2,500 higher than that other offer. So this is the increment that we're willing to exceed that other offer by. And we're willing to increase the offer in increments of $2,500 more than once. You could put once, but we're going to say more than once because we know that Tucker is willing to offer up to $415,000. He doesn't want to have to pay that if he doesn't have to, right? But he's willing to go up to that much in increments of $2,500 if somebody else comes in higher than us. So I hope that makes sense. Now, the seller has to be able to show that another offer did in fact trigger our escalation clause. So they can't just, willy-nilly say, hey, guess what? We got another offer. No, they have to show it to us. And the seller has to send that offer that triggered the escalation clause within 1 day. I put 1 day here, to the buyer directly, along with an amendment indicating that the purchase price is officially being adjusted. Okay, so this is indicating the seller sends that offer directly over to the buyer, and we have to provide the buyer's email address here so that can be emailed. I hope that makes sense. But again, this just gives our buyer proof that another offer did in fact come in higher than ours, and that was the offer that triggered our escalation clause. Okay, so those are the documents. Now, there are other documents that get included within your offer, right? You send through the offer to purchase, the addendum A, addendum AC, addendum S, the lead paint. You also would include a copy of your pre-approval letter. And that would all be combined into one PDF and submitted to the listing agent as your offer packet. So if folks are looking for practice, I would highly encourage you to take the next day and send me your offer. We went through a lot of this already, kind of some of the answers, but practice is certainly something that we strongly encourage everyone to do. It gives you more confidence. So I encourage everybody here to send me your completed offer packet and cover letter by 11 a.m. tomorrow. So 24 hours from now. If you want me to then take a look at your offer, I can give you feedback. And it's just an extra way for you guys to get some practice in. So I'm sorry. I know this always feels like it goes fast because it does go fast. But does anybody have any initial questions? No. Okay. I will send you both then the document, the compensation agreement, the MLS information, the instructions. I will send that to you after I get off the Zoom. And if you guys do take advantage of the practice, I hope you do. And I hope to see your offer in my inbox by 11 a.m. tomorrow. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining. You're welcome.